The cab smelled like pine air freshener and stale coffee, and I had my face pressed against the window the whole last mile, just drinking in the sight of ordinary things. Stop signs. Sprinklers. A dog chasing a tennis ball across a front yard. After 7 months on a North Sea oil platform where the horizon looked the same in every direction, ordinary things felt like miracles. Then we turned onto Callaway Street, and I saw the windows of my shop. They were dark, not closed for the night dark, gutted dark. The hand-lettered sign I'd spent 3 weekends painting Lena's Bloom studio, curling vines around each letter, was gone. In its place, taped crookedly to the glass, was a sheet of printer paper that read "Sold pending transfer." Through the window, I could see the display cases had been moved, the pegboard walls stripped, and my custom refrigeration units were already pulled from the wall, their thick electrical cables coiled on the floor like shed snakeskin. I didn't tell the driver to stop. I paid, got out, and stood on the sidewalk with my duffel bag at my feet. My husband was leaning against his truck in the parking lot beside the building, scrolling his phone with one thumb. His mother was sitting on the hood, eating from a bag of chips, her ankles crossed like she was waiting for a parade to start. Neither of them saw me for a full 10 seconds, which gave me enough time to understand exactly what I was looking at. He finally glanced up. Whatever expression he'd been wearing dissolved into something I'd never seen on his face before. Not guilt, not shame. Something more like the look a poker player gets when he realizes the other person has been counting cards the whole time. His mother didn't bother with expressions at all. She slid off the hood, brushed the salt from her fingers, and said, "We figured you'd turn up eventually. Before I tell you what was sitting in the filing cabinet inside that stripped-out shop, and the document that was about to burn their entire plan to the ground, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels." I didn't walk toward them. I set my bag down slowly, the way you set things down when you want your hands free. My name is Lena. I'm 32 years old, and for the past 4 years I have spent 7 months out of every 12 on a rotating crew aboard an offshore drilling platform in the North Sea. The work is loud, dangerous, and deeply unglamorous, and I have loved every second of it, not because of the oil or the machinery or the paycheck, though the paycheck is considerable. I love it because, out there, nobody knows your history. Nobody assigns you a role. You are exactly as competent as your last decision, and nothing else. I came home from my first rotation with enough saved to put a down payment on a small commercial space on Callaway Street in the mid-sized Ohio city where I grew up. I had always wanted a floral design studio. Not a flower shop with buckets of carnations by the register, but a real design studio. Custom arrangements, event installations, the kind of work where you show up to a venue the morning of a wedding and turn an empty room into something that makes people stop walking. I built out the space myself over 6 months, learned refrigeration systems on YouTube, talked my way into wholesale accounts, hired 2 part-time employees who became the best thing that ever happened to my business. I also, in that same period, married my husband. I will not say it was a mistake, because I don't fully believe that, but I will say that people reveal themselves slowly and that I was away for 7 months at a time, which meant I only ever saw the version of him that was on good behavior. By year 3, I understood the pattern. When I was home, everything was warm and functional. When I left, things unraveled. He had what I had started to think of as an appetite for newness, for action, for the short-term feeling of having more than you'd earned. He'd burned through 2 business ventures that I had quietly covered. There was a period of sports betting I hadn't known about until the credit card statement. His mother, who had never warmed to me but had always warmed to the comfort my income provided, encouraged every impulse he had and called it backing her son. I had started planning before I left for this last rotation, not because I knew exactly what would happen, but because I had learned, out on that platform, that the only thing standing between you and a catastrophic failure is the preparation you did before anyone thought you'd need it. "Where's the key?" I asked. He pushed off the truck. "Lena, listen. Things got complicated while you were gone. I needed to make a decision." "You needed," I repeated. The card debt was at a point where they were talking about a judgment. My mother helped me figure out a path forward. The shop was sitting there. "You weren't using it." I looked at his mother, who had the particular composure of someone who has rehearsed this conversation many times. She gave me a small shrug. "The building generates nothing when you're offshore," she said. "We found a buyer who paid fair market. The money cleared the debt and leaves plenty for a fresh start. You should be thanking us." 7 months on a platform teaches you to stay calm in situations where panic is the obvious response. When an alarm goes off at 3 in the morning and the wind is 40 knots and the deck is slick and you have 17 decisions to make in the next 90 seconds, the only useful thing your body can do is slow down. I had practiced that slowness until it lived in my muscles. I looked at my husband. You used the power of attorney. He straightened slightly. You signed it before you left. In case of emergency. Medical decisions? I said. And personal financial accounts. I signed it in case I came back in a body bag. Not so you could liquidate my business while I was still breathing. The shop is in your name, he said, with the confidence of someone who has recently consulted with someone who turned out to be wrong. It's a personal asset. The POA covers it. I almost told him right then. But I had learned something else on that platform. You don't interrupt a controlled burn. You let it run its course and contain it at the edge you've already prepared. So instead I asked, is the buyer here? He hesitated, then nodded toward the shop. She's inside doing a final inventory count before the transfer papers get filed tomorrow. I'd like to meet her. His mother stepped forward. Lena, don't go in there and make a scene. The deal is done. The debt is cleared. You can rebuild somewhere else. I picked up my duffel bag and walked to the front door. The woman inside was probably 50, with the kind of organized energy that comes from buying and flipping commercial properties for a living. She had a clipboard and a measuring tape, and she turned around when I pushed the door open with the expression of someone expecting a contractor. You must be the wife, she said, recalibrating immediately. Her name was Patricia, and she had the tone of someone who had navigated difficult sellers before and found them manageable. I've heard there might be some hesitation on your part. I want you to know the offer was strong, and your husband negotiated well. The sale price was $420,000. The debt is cleared, and there's a remainder being held in a joint account. She paused. I have the transfer documents here. Everything is in order. I looked past her at the stripped walls, at the place where my refrigeration units had stood, at the bare floor where my work tables had been. I had sanded that floor on my hands and knees. I had laid the tile in the back room myself, over a long weekend, with my sister sitting on the counter reading instructions off her phone while I pressed each piece into the mortar. Patricia, I said, did you run a title search on the commercial entity? She lowered her clipboard slightly. The property is owned by you personally. Your husband has power of attorney. This is a straightforward asset transfer. The property is leased, I said. I don't own the building, but the business, the legal entity, the business license, the equipment, the contracts, the wholesale accounts, all of it that's not in my name personally. She looked at me. My husband provided documentation showing that he holds a general POA over my personal accounts and medical decisions. I reached into the inside zipper pocket of my duffel bag. He did not provide this. I unfolded the document and held it out. It was a certified copy of the Articles of Organization for Bloom Studio LLC, filed with the Ohio Secretary of State 14 months ago. The registered agent and sole managing member listed on the document was not Lena. It was my sister. Patricia took the paper. Her eyes moved across it, then moved back to the top and read it again, slower. The business was restructured as an LLC 14 months ago, I said. I am a non-managing member. My sister holds managing authority over all business assets, contracts, and transfers. My husband has no relationship to the LLC whatsoever. His power of attorney covers me as an individual. It does not extend to a separate legal entity of which I am only a partial member. Patricia's clipboard came down slowly until it was hanging from one hand at her side. The equipment your crew moved today, I continued. The refrigeration units, the display cases, the commercial lighting, all of it is owned by the LLC. Not by me personally, which means your movers carried LLC property out of this space without authorization from the managing member, which is my sister, who is currently in Cincinnati and who did not consent to any of this. From the doorway behind me, I heard my husband say, "That's not how it works." I turned around. He was standing in the entrance, his mother just behind his shoulder. His jaw was tight. He'd been listening from outside, and the confidence was starting to leach out of his expression like color from a fabric left in the sun. You signed the POA, he said. That covers everything you own. I don't own the LLC's assets, I said. The LLC does. You're splitting hairs. I'm reading the law. I looked at Patricia. You paid $420,000 based on your assumption that my husband had authority to convey these assets. He didn't. He couldn't. The sale isn't valid. Patricia turned to face my husband, and the businesslike neutrality she'd worn since I walked in was entirely gone. What replaced it was the expression of a person doing very fast, very ugly math. How much of that money has been spent? she asked him. He didn't answer immediately, and the silence did the work for him. The card debt, his mother said, stepping forward with the energy of someone trying to regain control of a meeting she thought she was running. We paid off the card debt. It was nearly $140,000. The rest is in an account. We can return the remainder. The remainder, Patricia repeated. 280,000, his mother said, and had the grace to look only briefly uncomfortable about saying it out loud. So you've spent $140,000, Patricia said slowly, of money from a transaction that was not legally authorized. We had documentation. You had a personal POA, Patricia said, her voice dropping to something very quiet and very controlled, that you represented to me as authority over a business entity. I paid $420,000 based on that representation. She pulled out her phone. I watched her open a contact listed as R. Whitmore Attorney. My husband took a step toward her. Let's talk about this before anyone makes a call. There's nothing to talk about, Patricia said. I was defrauded. The money was transferred across state lines on the basis of a misrepresentation about legal authority. That's wire fraud. I need to call my attorney, and then I need to call the police. And I suggest you don't leave this building before they arrive. His mother turned to me. For the first time since I'd come home, the composure was fully gone. Lena, you can still fix this. Tell her there was a miscommunication. Tell her the documents were confusing. You don't want your husband to go to prison over a paperwork issue. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about the 7 months I had spent offshore. The way the platform had its own weather, its own gravity, its own logic completely separate from everything on the shore. I thought about the Sunday morning I had called home and my husband had been short-tempered and strange, and how I had pushed the worry down because worrying from that distance accomplishes nothing. I thought about my sister, who had driven to Cincinnati the month before I deployed to sign LLC documents at a notary's office, who had asked me only once if I was sure I needed to do this, and when I said yes, had signed without asking anything else. I don't have anything to fix, I said. His mother's face hardened. You're choosing a building over your marriage? You chose for me, I said, when you moved my refrigeration units. My husband crossed the room in 4 steps and grabbed my arm. Not hard. The grip of a person trying to make a point through physical contact rather than out of genuine aggression. I looked down at his hand and then up at him with the specific expression I had learned to use on the platform when a junior crew member was about to make a mistake they couldn't walk back. Let go, I said. He held for 2 more seconds and then released. And the release told me everything. He was out of moves. You set this up, he said. You knew I was in trouble. You knew about the debt and you restructured everything and waited for me to trip the wire. I restructured everything because I had a business I'd spent 4 years building and I was going to be 7 months out of contact and I wanted it protected. What you did with your debt was your own decision. I didn't plan your choices. I just planned my response to them. You let me go through with it, he said. And there was something raw in his voice now that might have been real. You came back and you stood there and you watched me sign those documents and you let me believe it was going to work? I got home 2 hours ago, I said. The documents were already signed before I stepped off the plane. You did all of this before I had the chance to stop it. The only thing I could do by the time I walked in here was make sure the law worked the way it was supposed to. Patricia was on the phone in the corner, speaking in a low, steady voice. Outside, I could see the couple from the dry cleaners 2 doors down standing on the sidewalk, watching through the glass with the concerned attention of neighbors who have noticed something is wrong. His mother tried one more time. She put herself between me and the door and lowered her voice like we were having a private conversation. Think about what you're doing. He's your husband. We are your family. This woman is a stranger. You're going to destroy your marriage, destroy your family, to protect a flower shop? A legally registered limited liability company, I said, that employs 2 people who have worked for me for 3 years and depend on that income. She stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. Also, I said, the flowers. Patricia finished her call. My attorney is on his way. He's advised me to hold everyone here and to contact the police. I've done both. She looked at my husband with the unflinching calm of someone who has recalculated and found a new path forward. I will be recovering the full $420,000 through civil proceedings. If you cooperate fully, my attorney may recommend against pursuing criminal charges, but that decision hasn't been made. My husband sat down on the floor in the empty shop, not dramatically, not collapsing. He just lowered himself onto the clean concrete tiles and sat there, forearms on his knees, looking at the wall where my pegboard had been. He looked young in that moment, and I felt something complicated move through me. Not forgiveness, not quite grief. Something more like the recognition that this was always where this road ended, and the only question had been whether I would be standing or sitting when we got here. His mother paced. She called someone on her phone. She made 3 different attempts to explain the situation to Patricia, each one more legally creative than the last. And Patricia acknowledged each one with the patient non-response of a person who has been advised not to say anything further. The police arrived 22 minutes later, 2 officers, then a third. My husband didn't resist. He answered their questions in short, flat sentences. His mother was considerably more verbal and was asked twice to lower her voice. Patricia's attorney arrived 12 minutes after that, a tall man in a gray suit who immediately separated himself with Patricia in the back room where my coolers had been, and they spoke in low voices for a long time. I stood near the front window and watched Callaway Street. A woman walked past with a stroller. The dry cleaning neighbors eventually went back inside. A cloud moved over the afternoon sun, and the street went gray for a moment, and then brightened again. One of the officers came to speak with me. I gave him the LLC documents, the articles of organization, the operating agreement, my sister's contact information. He photographed everything and asked me to come to the station the following morning to give a formal statement. I said I would. Before my husband was escorted out, he stopped beside me. He didn't touch my arm this time. I really thought it was going to work, he said. I know, I said. Was the LLC always about protecting yourself from me? I thought about it honestly, the way I try to think about hard questions. It was about protecting what I'd built, I said. From anything. From a fire, from a bad lease, from a liability claim. You were one of many things I couldn't fully predict. He nodded, like that was an answer he could file somewhere useful. Then he went with the officer, and his mother followed, still talking, and the door swung shut behind them with the small, ordinary sound of a thing being closed. Patricia came out of the back room with her attorney. She looked at me for a moment. The LLC structure is clean, she said, not warmly, but with the professional respect of someone who recognizes competent preparation when she sees it. My attorney agrees the transfer is void. We'll be pursuing full recovery. She paused. You should have your attorney contact us. There will be a process. I understand, I said. You knew, she said. It wasn't quite an accusation. When you walked in, you already knew exactly what had happened and exactly where you stood. I suspected, I said. My sister had called me when the movers showed up. I had the document in my bag because I had packed it before I left, the same way I packed my offshore gear, just in case. She looked at me for another moment. Then she gathered her clipboard and her documents and left. My sister arrived 40 minutes later. She had gotten in her car when I texted her, no questions asked, and driven the 2.5 hours from Cincinnati with the LLC operating agreement and her personal copy of every filing we had ever made together. She walked in, looked at the stripped walls, looked at me, and said, "Tell me everything." We sat on the floor of the empty shop because there were no chairs left, and I told her everything, the whole hour of it. She listened with the focused attention she has always brought to information that matters. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The refrigeration units are in the parking lot. I saw them when I pulled in, still in the cart." I stood up. We went outside and looked at them in the late afternoon light, sitting on moving pallets, still in good shape, the coils undamaged, the doors intact. "We can reinstall them this weekend," my sister said. I looked at my shop. The windows were still dark, but the sign position was clean, ready for something new. I had the keys. The lease was in the LLC's name and unaffected by anything that had happened today. The wholesale accounts were active. My 2 employees had been texting me since they'd heard, asking what they should do, and I had told them to come in Monday. I wasn't whole yet. That would take time and paperwork, and probably a very long conversation with a divorce attorney, and somewhere in there, a period of grief for something I had wanted to work and had never quite worked right. But I had learned, on that platform, in the dark and the cold and the noise, that being whole is not the same thing as being functional. Functional comes first. Whole comes later, if you stay the course. I went back inside, walked to the back of the shop, and opened the filing cabinet in the corner. My sister had a key to it. Everything I had ever put in it was still there, untouched, because they hadn't known to look. The spare parts inventory, the vendor contracts, the client database, printed and alphabetized, all the things that make a business, instead of just a building with equipment in it. I flipped the lights on. The overheads buzzed and steadied, filling the space with flat white light that bounced off the clean concrete floor. My sister stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, watching me. "Monday?" she said. "Monday," I said. I spent that night at my sister's and slept better than I had in 7 months. Not because everything was fixed, because the things I could control were exactly where I had placed them. The morning after, I gave my statement to the police. Patricia's civil suit was filed within the week. My divorce attorney, a small, precise woman who seemed to find the LLC structure genuinely delightful from a professional standpoint, told me the asset protection was airtight and that the marital estate proceedings would be straightforward. My husband had, in the language of the law, dissipated a marital asset, and the court would take a dim view of it. 3 months later, my husband entered a plea agreement on one count of fraud and was sentenced to 18 months probation, restitution to Patricia, and mandatory financial counseling. His mother was charged separately with conspiracy and settled out of court. Patricia recovered her full $420,000 through a combination of the remainder in the account, the liquidation of assets my husband had, and a civil judgment. My shop reopened on a Tuesday in October. I put the sign back up myself, same lettering, same curling vines. My 2 employees came back. The wholesale accounts picked up exactly where they had left them. The first event I worked after reopening was a rehearsal dinner for 60 guests. Late autumn flowers, dahlias and dried pampas grass, and deep burgundy roses. And when I walked into the venue at 6 in the morning to begin the installation, I stood in the empty room for a minute and looked at what wasn't there yet. Then I started building. There is something people say when they hear stories like this one. They say the person who protected themselves was smart, was calculating, had seen it coming. And maybe that's true. But what I know, from years of working in a place where one wrong decision ends careers or ends lives, is that preparation is not the same as prediction. I didn't know my husband would do what he did. I prepared because the world doesn't wait for you to be ready, and because everything I had been built by my own hands, in my own hours, in the brief months between long absences, and I had decided early that it would not be dismantled by someone else's urgency. I still go offshore, 7 months on, 5 months home. I leave the LLC in my sister's capable hands, the same hands that signed the documents without asking too many questions, because she trusted me and I had trusted myself. If you've ever had to quietly build a wall before anyone realized you needed one, you know exactly what I mean. Drop a comment below, I want to hear your story. And if someone in your life needs to hear this, send it to them. Somebody out there is about to leave for 7 months, and they haven't made that call to their attorney yet. Make the call.